princess. Princess Latifa is a member of the Dubai royal family. She's actually vegan as well because Freely the Banana Girl influenced her to become vegan. Latifa escaped from Dubai in late March 2018 and was forcibly returned from international waters near the Indian coast. She's currently held captive in her own kingdom and lives a life of confined leisure without freedom or rights over her own body and movements. As mentioned earlier, Latifa's father is the Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. The Sheik is a powerful world leader and allegedly responsible for kidnapping Latifa and her sister Shamsa and forcing them to live in the palace in Dubai, separate from each other. So we know this because Latifa made a 40-minute video outlining and alleging, among other things, that the Sheik had previously imprisoned, abused and tortured her. So this video was set to be released if her second escape attempt was unsuccessful, and unfortunately it wasn't, but I guess the idea was that it would draw public attention to what is happening with her family and just let the world know the truth of her father's actions. And to a large extent, she's achieved that because this story has been covered by BBC, the New York Times, the LA Times, the ABC, 60 Minutes, just to name a few. Okay, so let's just take a step back for the moment and look at the events and allegations in more detail. This all took place in Dubai in the UAE. Now, the UAE is a country southeast of the Arabian Peninsula on the Persian Gulf, bordering Oman to the east, Saudi Arabia to the south, as well as sharing maritime borders with Qatar to the west and Iran to the north. So this is important to understand because it's important to understand where the UAE sits in terms of its geography, because it's influenced politically by its geographical regions like Saudi, like Syria, like Iran, and basically all the places in the world where women have less rights than black slaves in the 18th century. Alright, so before Latifa's two attempted escapes, her sister actually tried to escape in 2000. And Latifa tried to escape in 2001 to try to help her sister. So it's important to understand the timeline of things and the repetition of how these women have tried to escape, because it's important to understand that this treatment of women in the Sheik's family is not an isolated incident. It's a repeated behavior pattern. It's more of a celebrated family tradition. So we need to establish this isn't just one case of one father being mean to one daughter this one time. This is repeated behavior by the Sheik, and it's a symptom of a wider disease that is prevalent in the Middle East. It's called Sharia law. Okay, so just so that we're all on the same page, I want to just do a quick chronology of things. So we have Shamsa, and she escaped in 2000, I believe, and Latifa tries to escape as well. I mean, Shamsa was returned before, but Latifa wants to escape and try and help her from the outside in 2001. And keep in mind, at this point, Latifa was about 16 years old, so she was literally a kid, a child, classified by law a child, when her father was ordering men to go and beat her up and abuse her. So I realize it's hard for people to understand without reading into Sharia law, without living in a Middle Eastern country or coming from a Muslim Islamic background, what life is like for these girls. The most important thing you need to grasp is that they don't have their freedom. They don't have freedom. They can't decide they want to study medicine, they want to become a singer. They don't have that. They can't pursue their dreams. They can't pursue their dreams. They literally cannot go down the street and visit a friend without a government official following their every move. And this is more in terms of the royal family, especially for Latifa, since she tried to escape once already. What's even more heartbreaking about this whole situation is that Latifa and Shamsa shared a really close relationship. Latifa said that she saw her as a mother, as a maternal kind of figure, looked up to her, and they were really close. And all they want to do is to be together, and because of one man, they cannot do that. According to Latifa as well, before the Sheik had Shamsa forcibly returned, the Sheik actually went to Shamsa's house to bribe her friend, for information I'm assuming, with a Rolex. So he tried to bribe her friend with a Rolex and also tapped her phone in the process. I actually laughed when I heard this because I literally cannot believe how pathetic human beings are and just how one person can care so much about what adult grown women are doing. It's so weird and depraved. People are scared that Donald Trump is ruling America. I would be equally as terrified this guy is ruling Dubai. By the way, there's also a third woman being held captive in the Dubai palace, which at this point is starting to be less like Walt Disney Castle vibes and more like Guantanamo Bay kind of vibes. And her name is Fatma. She's the adopted sister of Latifa, and she's kept in a cabin in Latifa's house, locked up and separated from the rest of the family because she's considered rebellious. So this all happened around 2000, which brings us back to Latifa's story, which is taking place in the present time. So in 2001, when Latifa tries to escape, and in order to help her sister Shamsa, I've got pretty emotional watching her video because some of the things she says, like even she knew she might get caught, but at least she would be together with the Shamsa again, like they put them in prison together, and that didn't happen. Really, and honestly broke my heart. I can't believe people have to go through this, especially a person as beautiful and kind as Latifa. It makes me so angry, you guys.
basically one guy was holding me while the other guy was beating me. And they did that repeatedly. I think the first time they tortured me, I didn't feel any pain because I was in so much shock. It was like somebody was hitting me through a pillow or something. I could see what they were doing, but I was like, are they just destroying my body? What's going on? The pain didn't register because I think I was in so much shock, and it was a long day with little sleep, and I didn't feel the pain, and it was like a half-hour torture session. And then the next times I was tortured, it was for 5 hours. And yeah, I was just pulled from the bed, driven to another location, in the palace, in the same building, the khema, the tent, which is not a tent. And yeah, they tortured me. I knew how long it was because I had a watch. And they told me that your father told us to beat you until we kill you. That's his orders, your father's orders. Your father, the ruler of Dubai, that's what he said. So all of this public image that he's trying to portray, human rights, is bullshit. He's the most evil person I've ever met in my life. He's pure evil. There's nothing good in him. He's responsible for so many people's deaths and ruining so many people's lives. He doesn't care about anyone. He only cares about his image, his reputation, and he will gladly kill somebody. But he doesn't do it himself. He doesn't do the dirty work himself. He'll just get other people to do it. He doesn't care. After my uncle died, he killed one of his wives. He killed her. Everyone knows about it. The Moroccan one. Because she was too... her behavior was too outrageous. I think she just talked too much, and he felt threatened by her, so he just killed her.
So even when they weren't physically abusing her, though, they would still be psychologically torturing her. They would switch off lights. They would get her out of bed in the middle of the night just to beat her. There wasn't any medical help. She would be literally crawling back to bed sometimes and sleeping on like this rank, disgusting mattress with blood and shit stains on it. So it's pretty clear to me this is a woman who has experienced a lot of pain and suffering. She's not mentally unstable. She's not losing her mind or anything like that. She's simply angry. She suffered physical and mental trauma, and she's demanding that which she is entitled to, her freedom. So in total, Latifa was in prison for 3 years, 4 months, June 2002, and came out October 2005. So she was imprisoned from 2002 to 2005. That's where the abuse happened. Shamsa was kidnapped and imprisoned in 2000. Okay, so for the timeline's sake, we're in 2018 now. So on the 24th of February, Latifa and her Finnish friend Tina left Dubai in a car and crossed the border to Oman. They left Oman on jet skis and joined the American-French citizen yacht Nostromo. On the night of March 4th, the Nostromo was intercepted by Indian authorities while approaching Goa on the US-registered yacht. And I'd just like to point out at this point how insane it was in terms of what was used to stop one woman from leaving Dubai. It was 3 Indian and 2 Emirati warships, 2 military planes, and a helicopter were involved in the raid on Nostromo. So that happened in 2018. Latifa tries to escape again, but is caught. Okay, so later that year in December, by this stage, BBC had done their story. People were starting to criticize the treatment of Latifa by the Sheik. So the Sheik and his family decided to release photographs showing Latifa alongside Mary Robinson, a human rights advocate, and in my opinion, complete fraud, trying to convey the false image that Latifa's happy to be imprisoned, happy to be at home, happy to be with her family. And Mary Robinson is a human rights advocate, and she assessed Latifa and said that her mental stability and everything was fine. She is obviously being paid off by Dubai. I don't have enough time in this video because it's already so long to go into Mary Robinson. It deserves a video of her own. But I don't know how anyone could morally do that. Like, see Latifa, understand everything that's happened, and then release a statement saying, oh yeah, she's fine. So the fight for Latifa's freedom is far from over, as Tina, her best friend, continues to lead the campaigns in Europe. By the way, Tina is awesome. She's an amazing woman. She's fighting for Latifa's freedom. She's helped me so much with this video and Freely's video as well, and she's 100% dedicated to Latifa's freedom and to helping women in the Middle East, and I really admire that. Okay, so the fight for Latifa's freedom is far from over, and it's been helped significantly by the fact that recently, as you would have seen, one of the Sheikh's 6 wives, Princess Haya, has fled to London, successfully sought political asylum in a German embassy, and is currently kicking back in her $85 million mansion in Kensington Palace Gardens, the area of London for the super rich. And you've probably seen as well that both the Sheik and Princess Haya are currently locked in a high-profile battle in the UK High Court over custody of their 2 children. Both sides have appointed some of Britain's best-known lawyers, and it's apparently caused some kind of diplomatic crisis in the UK because both parties are close to the royal family. The Sheik is the Sheik, but you know, Princess Haya, she's an Oxford-educated princess who's a half-sister of the Prince of Jordan, meaning it's most likely going to create tension between those 2 nations as well. Princess Haya was apparently one of the Sheik's 6 wives, and now I can see why he needs so many wives, because they'll keep running away. So now that we've established the Sheik's horrible treatment of women, why don't we get to know more fun facts about the man? So as we know, he's the ruler of Dubai, and he's been credited for the growth of Dubai into a global city, as well as the launch of major buildings and projects around the city of Dubai. So I think he's hailed as some kind of business guru, but you know what? Building some pretty buildings around the world doesn't excuse you from committing international human rights violations. Oh, he's also a major player in the cruel horse racing industry, owning multiple thoroughbred breeding businesses with operations in 6 countries. Okay, so let's round up the allegations made against him by Latifa. So now we're talking about the Sheik. Sheik. So his full name is Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. So he's been accused of the kidnap and torture of Latifa when she was 16. He's been accused of the kidnap of his other daughter, Shamsa. I think Shamsa was 18, but I might be wrong. Latifa's uncle's wife. And she's implied that he's actually numerous other people as well. Let's put various other. In the 40-minute video she made alleging this, she also accused him of arson. The Sheikh's treatment of his daughters is oppressive and disgusting. However, it is but a mere extension to the way all women are treated in the Middle East. These societies operate under Sharia law, ancient, outdated, sexist laws which have no place in modern civilized society. Just like Nazism started with Hitler's vision, the Islamic vision is a caliphate, a society ruled by Sharia law in which women who have sex before marriage are stoned to death, homosexuals are beaten, and apostates like me are killed. Sharia law is as amicable to liberal democracy as Nazism. Violence is inherent in Islam. It's a destructive, nihilistic cult of death. It legitimizes murder. Those aren't my words, by the way. They're the words of a prominent activist in this area who escaped the same fate of so many women forced to live under this oppressive male regime. So I've been thinking about when I make videos like this and talk about this topic in general, of just using the term Sharia law and not using the term Islam, but unfortunately for the Middle East, Sharia in the Middle East is fundamental to all aspects of Islam, so we can't really separate the two. I also find it really self-centered and annoying when people come at me with things like, you know, there's moderate Muslims, you know, there's feminist Muslims, you know, there's progressive Muslims, and to that I say, great, that's awesome. Then those Muslims and the people defending Islam can stop making every single damn criticism on the religion about them and acknowledge the fact that on a much wider scale, especially in the Middle East, the religion needs a severe radical reform. Muslims who are serious about achieving true peace need to revise the Quran and the Hadith so that there is consistency between what the peace-loving Muslims want and what their religion says. And by the way, reality check, the purpose of Sharia law has nothing to do with worshipping Muhammad or worshipping religion or anything like that. Sharia law exists for one reason and one reason only. It's to keep women subordinate to men. It's to make sure women will never have proper equality, social, political, economic power as men. From the day these women are born till the day they die, they are taught in school, at home, in the workforce, that they are the subordinate gender. Let's remember that Sharia law isn't some straightforward dot point, one-page document that God handed down to his disciples. Men themselves over time derived the law from different Islamic sources, the Quran, the Sunnah, the Qiyas, and the Ijma, making it a man-made law. It's a man-made law that has attached itself, like a parasite, to the teachings of Islam. Under the guardianship system in Sharia law, women are treated as children their entire life, and they always need males there to make decisions, to take them places they can't drive. I think if someone sent me to Saudi Arabia, I would feel more foreign than if I was sent to Mars. Sharia law, I would say, is the #1 human-centered ideology that is the most incompatible with human rights. Human rights, a concept that holds a philosophy and holds so many values that lefties and progressives seem to superficially cherish so much. Okay, so far we've covered Shamsa and Latifa being kidnapped and tortured. We've talked about the Sheik's personality and tendency to abuse women, and we've linked this to Sharia law, which is the religious law forming part of the Islamic tradition. Okay, so now I want to talk a bit about just how incompatible, from a legal perspective, Sharia law is with international human rights and a democratic society. Okay, so we're going to be talking about international human rights law for a bit. International HR law. Okay, so much of international law and human rights and treaties have originally been informed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a landmark document which expresses basic ideals of freedom and happiness of all people. So we'll abbreviate that into UDHR. So while it's not technically a legally binding document, it's still revolutionary in that it was sort of the first one to come about, and it's informed many other legally binding treaties, such as the Conventions on the Rights of the Child, Rights of Women and Freedom from Torture, and other legislative instruments. So what we just mentioned, Convention on the Rights of the Child, Rights of Women, Freedom from Torture, Sharia law is in breach of all of them, more than any other religious ideology in the world. And that's really what separates Islam from other religious ideologies. For example, the Christian powers have accepted the separation of the worldly and the divine. Secular law doesn't interfere with their religion, and they don't interfere with the state. We haven't seen that happen with Islam. And trigger warning, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the activist that I mentioned before, also says that Islamic societies are lagging in enlightened thinking, tolerance, and knowledge of other cultures, and that their history cannot cite a single person who has made a discovery in science or technology or changed the world through artistic achievement. So in order to properly expose who the Sheik is and what he's done, and what kind of person, what kind of father, just what kind of human being he is, I want to talk about this camel jockey's case. And we're just going to call it the camel jockey case. In 2006, the Sheik, along with 500 other defendants, including his brother, was accused of enslaving young boys, thousands of young boys, to be used as camel jockeys in racing. Once in Dubai, it was claimed that the children, some of them as young as 2, were enslaved, forced to work in poor working conditions, and forced to take part in the dangerous sport. The Sheik and his brother and about 500 other people faced 9 counts, including slavery, facilitating child labor, battery, assault, infliction of emotional distress, and wrongful death. So the lawsuit took place in Florida in the US, and ultimately Judge Cecilia M. Altonaga decided to throw out the case, her rationale being that the court had no personal jurisdiction over the matter. Jurisdiction simply means the power or authority to make legal decisions over a particular matter or person. Okay, so now I want to have a pretty, somewhat thorough breakdown of the case, of the judgment itself, and I want to show why I not only disagree with the judge's reason legally, but I think the law here itself as well is flawed and needs reform. I also think there is evidence to show that probably from the moment this case was filed in court, it had already been decided, making it politically and morally corrupt. Okay, so this camel jockey case takes place in Florida. Let's put Flo in the US. And that's important because the main issue that we're going to be discussing is the jurisdiction. Okay, so the case is thrown out because the judge in that case said that she didn't have any jurisdiction over the matter or over the Sheik. So the issue is that he's obviously a non-resident, he's a foreigner, and she says, I don't have jurisdiction over you. And basically I've read the case, and I've read the case judgment, it was 15 pages, I've read the relevant statute and American law in this area, and it's all very legal and boring, and they use terms like long arm, jurisdiction, and due process clause, and I don't have to explain every single thing, but basically what Florida law says is that a judge in a federal court can still exercise proper jurisdiction over a non-resident, so over the Sheik, if it can be proven that the defendant, which is a Sheik, had minimum contacts and sufficient activity there. So the lawyers for the victims in this case really needed to properly establish that the Sheik had those minimum contacts and had sufficient activity in the state of Florida. So one of the significant facts that the good guys, the lawyers for the the victims were able to prove was that the Sheik did have property in the US, in Florida. He was a beneficiary of a business. Unfortunately, the lawyers for the Sheik were able to successfully argue that even though he was a beneficiary of that business, he had no day-to-day management of that business. It had its own board of directors. He had basically nothing to do with it, they argued, and that was not enough to meet the legal test that I told you about before, where they had to establish that he had significant activity and sufficient contacts there. Also, the other big challenge that the victims' lawyers really had here is the fact that there's a really well-established rule in corporate law, not just American corporate law, but any corporate law, to the best of my knowledge, in any democratic country, is that a corporation can't impute its actions to a shareholder, which in this case means the Sheik. This rule arises from the basic tenet in American corporate law that the corporation and the shareholders, or the people in the corporation, are distinct entities, which in this case means the Sheik. Now, this rule arises from a basic tenet in corporate law that holds that the corporation and the shareholders, or the people that work for the corporation, are distinct legal entities. So there are ways around this principle if you really want to try and hold a shareholder responsible and try and separate them from the corporation. And there's one way, it's called the alter ego theory, and in here it must be shown that the corporation was a mere instrument of the shareholders. It was just like an instrumentality, and that the corporation was used for improper conduct. And the lawyers for the victims did not pursue this route, I assume, because it would have taken too much evidence that they didn't have at the time, and tried to argue the alleged acts detailed in their complaint may be attributed to the Sheik because the corporations are held beneficially for them. So basically they were trying to say that the fact that the company was held for the Sheik was enough to meet the minimum contacts and activity requirement. And lawyers for the victims were able to cite some relevant legal authorities here and some cases to support this line of thinking, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough to overcome the very well established rule that the corporation and the shareholders are very distinct legal entities. And when you try and do this, they actually call it trying to pierce the corporate veil, because you're trying to hold someone responsible, trying getting rid of the corporate veil and holding an individual responsible. So in addition to a Florida state law, this lawsuit was also brought under federal law, being the Alien Tort Statute. Now, the Alien Tort Statute does give jurisdiction to a court over a non-resident, but you have to show that this non-resident is not also subject to jurisdiction in another area. And unfortunately, the Sheik also had businesses in Kentucky, so the judge used that to say, I can't say that he is not subject to jurisdiction in any other state because he also had businesses in Kentucky, therefore he does not meet this requirement. So with the child slavery jockey case, that's basically how it went. They brought it before a US court. The US court said, no personal jurisdiction, sorry, you didn't prove to me that he really has any businesses here for me to, enliven that jurisdiction. Okay, so basically in that case, it was thrown out because of jurisdiction. Okay, so I think this whole issue of personal jurisdiction really reflects a wider tension between state law and international law. More specifically, between international law, not just state law, but the power of the state, how much power the state can have over its citizens and over its own legal decisions, and we call this state sovereignty. So my position here is that if international law really wants to make its great humanitarian ideals a reality, it really needs to somehow develop some real legal force and authority. In cases of serious international human rights violations, the issue of personal jurisdiction just shouldn't be such a big issue. Or at least it shouldn't be that much of an issue, especially where there are 30,000 victims involved. So the law is based on principles of justice and equality, then any high court within reason and geography should be able to hear the merits of the case. Or at the very least, the threshold for allowing jurisdiction needs to be lowered. I also think the lawyers for the victims in this case, I'm sorry to say, were just not that good. When I was reading the case and the judgment, I was like, their legal arguments could have been stronger, and one really weird thing they did was not request jurisdictional discovery, and they are entitled to request that. Discovery is basically when the other side, both sides, are compelled to provide all relevant documents and communications, except those that are considered privileged, to the court and to the other side. If they did this, I think this could have been a huge advantage to them, but they didn't do it, probably due to lack of time and organization and all those kind of things. So overall, they could have done a better job. Okay, so we've talked about international law and state sovereignty and the tension there that arises from this case, which is reflective of wider tension between those two things. I'm going to briefly just talk a little bit about crimes against humanity in international law and the role of the International Criminal Court. Because these cases, the one like the child slavery one with the Sheik, can be brought under the International Criminal Court. So the International Criminal Court was set up after the Second World War as a way to punish the Nazis, also known as the Nuremberg trials. And the International Criminal Court, the ICC, is not to be confused with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. While the International Criminal Court's role is to punish an individual, the ICJ's main role is to offer advice or give a legal opinion on two or more states on an international matter. So we're dealing with the ICC, and the ICC deals with four main matters, and that is genocide, war crimes, crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity. To prove someone is guilty of crimes against humanity, it must be a wide-scale, systemic attack on a group of people. In this case, it was indeed wide-scale and specific, and it involved 30,000 young boys, and I believe it meets the requirements for it to be a crime against humanity, assuming it's true. Unfortunately, the way the ICC and much of international law works is a two-step process, which the Sheikh and the UAE, Dubai, whatever, never took part in. The jurisdiction of each court has to come from a source, and it's the Rome Statute which gives the ICC jurisdiction over international matters. But in order for it to have that jurisdiction, the state needs to become a signatory of the Rome Statute. So when it does that, it submits itself to the ICC's jurisdiction over international matters. And after approval has been granted with the state's own internal procedures, it will notify the other parties that they consent to be bound to the treaty. The UAE, along with other famous countries who like to commit international war crimes and be pathetic human beings, have never become a signatory or ratified the Rome Statute, meaning the ICC does not have any jurisdiction over the Sheikh. Because when I was reading about this case, I was like, surely this is like an international law matter, surely it would come before the International Criminal Court and not some random state in Florida. But it turns out, because the UAE is never signatory, the ICC would never have jurisdiction over the Sheikh. This is just good to be aware of though, because I think long term, in order for international law to have any real teeth or impact on a global scale, on the scale that it really wants to with its noble ideals and overqualified lawyers, state sovereignty, the power of the state, is gonna have to decrease. Okay, so that was the ICC and why it was not applicable in this case. But back to the original case, by wrongfully, in my opinion, saying that the court had no jurisdiction in Florida to hear this matter, it allows her to relieve herself of any duty of looking at the other merits of the case. Because when you say no jurisdiction, I don't have the power, you don't have to consider anything else about the case and the evidence and the 30,000 victims and what they had to say. For what it's worth, in my opinion, it is far more likely this case was thrown out for political reasons, in that the US did not want to damage their military alliance and relationship with the UAE. Indeed, when this was all happening, the Sheikh actually made a public plea for the then President Bush to help win a dismissal of this federal lawsuit. The Sheikh said to Bush that the Emirates is a key partner in the global war against terror and that Bush should bring his personal attention to the suit. While the US maintained that politics were not involved in the decision of this case, I think you would have to be pretty ignorant to think it played no major factor in it. Doing further research into this case, I looked up at who appointed Judge Cecilia, and of course, she was appointed by George W. Bush. Which brings us to the relationship between the UAE and the US. The US and Dubai share a strong military alliance, as does the US with a lot of the Middle East. The United States maintains 3 military bases in the UAE. According to former US Ambassador Richard Olson, it was well known that if you needed something done in the Middle East, the Emiratis would do it. The US and the West have immense opportunity and potential to help oppressed women in the Middle East. They have the opportunity to speak out against the Sheikh, to condemn his actions as a world leader, as a father, as a human being, but they refuse to do it. This is because both the US and the UAE make billions in dealing with weapons and oil, and therefore both the USA and UAE are reluctant to criticize each other's politics and what their respective nations do to their citizens, regardless of how depraved and cruel the crime is, as in the case of Princess Latifa. It's the same with oil in Saudi Arabia. The US will basically look over anything as long as Saudi keeps the oil pumping. When you take away the weapons and you take away the oil, and those things aren't going to last forever, these people are going to have nothing. As a result, it is the victims who have to suffer at what is ultimately a masculine alliance. And the victims are always the women in the Middle East. So we've seen that military presence and interference does not really lead to change, to cultural change in their societies. It only leads to more problems. But there are many other strategies the West could collectively adopt in helping women, such as economic sanctions, international shaming, and offering financial aid to women's rights groups, or relocating women who are in danger to safer places around the world. And this seems like an ambitious project, but literally we've sent people to Mars. We've done so many just technologically brilliant things, and we've done so many things that are considered unachievable or ambitious, and people tell me it's too ambitious to create an organization that helps relocate women around the world and create organizations and help organizations that are dedicated to educating and relocating these women if they want. So this is highly applicable to the case of Latifa. We must keep putting public pressure on these countries so that they recognize her rights, her fundamental rights and freedoms as an adult female. I'll say something now just before we end, just off the cuff. Mass education, mass empowering women in the East and the West from all the BS, that's literally the only thing that is going to save this world. Like, what's going to destroy Sharia law, what's going to see the rise of veganism, I don't think it's going to happen with men in power, because from the East to the West, sorry boys, but this is just the truth, from the East to the West, they're just incompetent. I don't even hate them. Hatred is not an emotion I feel, I think they're incompetent. It's almost like how you feel towards an incompetent employee. You don't hate them, they're just not good at their job, so they need to be gone. So what does everyone think about this? Is it just another scandal in a ruling class of the elite? Is it just going to be overlooked by America and Europe and everyone again because of weapons and war? Or is this a profound telltale sign that Dubai and the UAE and the Sheik are slowly, the Middle East are slowly losing their power? Let me know and I'll see you in the next video.